Okay. People can hear me? I have 1 minute, but then it's going to be okay, great. In 1 minute, we'll start. In 1 minute, we'll start.
Exactly.
All
Hi.
right. It's 6:30.
Yeah, we're right on time.
All right, let's go. 30. So thank you for joining us here at the Eretz Tzvi Torah-thon. Shavuos is coming up, and I was thinking last Shabbat in Israel, in some places outside of Israel, they have this new institution. It's a very nice thing called Shabbat V'ahavtim et Hager. It's a Shabbat dedicated to the idea of recognizing and welcoming and being appropriately solicitous of Ger. I remember years ago I read an article in one of these magazines, like Mishpacha or Jewish. They still felt different, and they still felt like there were cultural things that they didn't get, and they still felt other. And that's part of the topic that I want to think about, because the Torah, the Gemara talks about the issue of ona'at hager, and ona'at hager is part of a larger topic of ona'at dvarim in general. So if you look at me, source number one, it's a Mishnah Bava Metzia. This topic is actually very well known because there's a story that people know for a completely other reason, but that's really a story about ona'ah. There's a story called Tanur Shalach Nai, which many people know is a story about Rabbi Eliezer having an argument with Chachamim, and they get heated, and at the climax, Rabbi Eliezer says, if I'm right, there's a voice should come out of heaven and say that I'm right. And a voice comes out of heaven and says, why would you argue with Rabbi Eliezer? He's always right. And Rabbi Yehoshua stands on his feet and he says, Lo b'shamayim, he, the verse tells us the Torah is no longer in heaven, and we don't listen to bat calls like that. We don't listen to divine voices like that, which is fine and great, although it's not necessarily true that we accept that view, but that's not why the story's there. The story's there because after that, they put Rabbi Eliezer in nidui, which is a lower form of cherem, because he held on to the debate long past when he was supposed to. So they're disciplining him. And the Torah tells a story about when Rabbi Gamliel was on a ship, and Rabbi Gamliel says, "Oh, I know this is what I did to Rabbi Eliezer, but I'm telling you, I did it because the Jewish people needed to be unified. They couldn't have great scholars just saying, I'll do something else, and the storm stops." So it seems like the Gemara thinks Rabbi Gamliel did the right thing, or he wasn't wrong, and yet the Gemara tells us that Rabbi Eliezer's wife, who was Rabbi Gamliel's sister. Imagine putting your brother-in-law in favor. Now, there might be a lot of people who would like to do that to their brothers-in-law, but Rabbi Gamliel actually did it for national reasons. She wouldn't let her husband daven, say tachanun fully anymore after that, because she was worried. And one day she didn't catch him. One day she didn't realize that he was about to say tachanun, and he does daven and says, "Oh, you just killed my brother," and it turned out to be true. And the Gemara says it's because Share Ona'ah lo ninalu, because the gates of Ona'ah, this is the topic, were never sealed. So it's an interesting thing to think about. Rabbi Eliezer was in the wrong. He was put in Nidui because he did the wrong thing. And remember, what's the way to get out of Nidui? The way to get out of Nidui is to say, I realize I did the wrong thing. I apologize. I'm not going to do it anymore. So what's going on? So it seems like that. So we'll come back to that. But that's why that story is there. So if you look with me now at source number one, the Mishnah of Mitzvah says, there's this thing called ona'ah when it comes to buying and selling. If you mischarge somebody, you charge them too much, or they pay you too little. They fool you into thinking that this item is cheaper, is less expensive than it is. That's called ona'ah. That's not our topic at all. The Mishnah is pointing out that there's also a thing called ona'ah in Devarim. And the Mishnah gives examples. The Mishnah says you can't say this comes up a lot. You can't go into a store and ask the price as if you're interested when you're not. But you have to be careful about that. I think it's true that I've done this. Many storekeepers I walk in, I say, I'm really just curious. Do you mind telling me the price? I'm not going to buy it. And they say, we're happy to, because you never know what's going to happen. Right? Maybe you won't buy it today. Maybe you buy tomorrow. They say, we're happy. If that's fine. That's fine. On the other hand, I recently met somebody who was looking for an apartment, and he put in a bid on an apartment, and then the owner withdrew the apartment from the market. He's just sort of been testing the waters. That's an ona'ah question. The ona'ah there is that you're raising people's hopes. They think they're going to buy something or going to sell something, and then they're not allowed to. That's not so relevant to what I want to talk about today, though. And the second line, the second word, of number one. The Mishnah says, Baal Tshuva, Lo Yamar Lo Zechor Masech HaRishonim. If the person is somebody who once was not observant and now has become observant either again or for the first time, somebody might be tempted to say, remember who you were. Who do you think you are? And then the same idea comes up with Ben Gerim, somebody who's a child, not a ger, not even a convert yet, the child of a ger, the child of a convert. Lo yomar lo zechor ma'aseh avutecha. You can't say, "Oh, look, remember what your parents were, or remember who you come from," and you can't because the verse says, "Beger lo tonev lo tilchatzenu." Says we're not allowed to do ona'at to a ger. So before we get to the Gemara, think about this: why would somebody do that? About tshuva, somebody comes back to observance. I know Baal tshuva; they're wonderful people. They're sincere. They're dedicated. Why would I ever think to say, "Oh, remember who you used to be"? Remember I used to this and this and this, or even you can even be more subtle about it if you're crafty. You can say, "What was a cheeseburger really like? How was it? How did it really taste?" And you're reminding them, "Oh, so why would we do that?" So why do we do that? So to think about why we do that, I just want to tell a story that I heard many years ago. I think it's a very funny story about a Mussar yeshiva. And this Mussar yeshiva, a guy comes as a new student. He has no idea what's going on. He walks in, and somebody says to him, "Oh, that guy, see that guy over there? He's been here 10 years." So he looks at the guy who's been here 10 years, and the guy's walking around saying, "If been garnished, if been garnished, I'm a nothing, I'm a nothing, if been garnished." And then he looks, somebody says, "Oh, wait, that's the 15-year guy. He's been here 15 years." The guy also head down to the ground, and his eyes down, walking around. He says, "I've been garnished, I'm a nothing, I'm a nothing." So this guy doesn't know anything else. He says, "Okay, that's what they do here." So he starts walking, and he starts saying, "I've been garnished, I've been garnished, I've been garnished." The 10-year guy nudges the 15-year guy in the with his elbow, and he says, "Look who thinks he's a garnish." So that's the key. The key is many of us, maybe not all of us, many of us want to think that we're special. We want to think we're above. We want to think we're doing better. When somebody comes along and does better than us, that's threatening. I know people who have full-time jobs and also learn tremendous amounts of Torah. It's embarrassing to me. I don't work at all, and I hope I try to learn Torah, but so the urge to knock them down a peg is very great. The Mishnah is telling us it's prohibited. It's prohibited with regular Jews. About Tshuva, somebody who was born Jewish, and with a born Jew, right? I should say born instead of regular. With a born Jew, went on for a while, comes back, can't bring it up to them. And with again, and not even a Garrett Ben Garrett, you can't say, "Look who your parents were." The Gemara adds in the third line of number one, in the middle of the line, the Gemara adds, Rabbanan, Lo Tanu Shamito, Be'onat Varim. Right? He says, no, we're talking about Onat Varim. What does that mean? It was about Tshuva, like in the Mishnah, but then now the Gemara adds, Ben Gerim, this bright adds, Imayager Ubal Mo Torah. Let's say this was a convert, and the convert starts to learn Torah. You might say to them, Al Yomarlo, Heshachal, Velot, Trefot, Shkatzim, Remasim, a mouth that ate non-kosher food, right? Non-kosher means an animal that wasn't slaughtered at all, it just died, or was, hacked to death, was shot to death. An animal that's a trefot had a wound and then it got shafted. Or vermin and lice, for instance, chocolate ants. Balamot Torah, where are you going to learn Torah that was given to us by God? Now, I just want to say it's ona'ah because we're bringing up to them who they used to be, and that's not allowed. That's the ona'ah part of it. We're trying to knock them down a peg and knock them down and say, "You're not worthy." That's the key defining factor of ona'ah. But notice the way the Breita and the Gemara thought you may take somebody down. You'd say to them, "You ate pork, and you think right, or you ate meat that had been not shachted properly. You ate a cow that had been shot on a hunt somewhere, right? And you think you're learning Torah." I just think it's so interesting because today I don't think we think like that anymore. But at the time of the Gemara and the Breita, it's clear that they thought that eating non-kosher, eating inappropriate foods would be a reason that to think of your whole mouth as some way impure. Now, conversion, we'll talk about later today. Conversion clearly wipes any of that away. And repentance clearly wipes any of that away. That's the Gemara's point. The Gemara's point is it's wrong to say it because it's wrong to try to do that to a fellow Jew. And it's also wrong because it's not true. So, says the Rambam the Sefer HaMitzvos number 2. The Rambam says the mitzvah is to love Gerim, to love converts. Jews. Why? Because there's a special verse in the Torah. I was talking to somebody yesterday who said, I understand, when you say there's a special verse in the Torah, aren't you making them less by singling them out? So the answer is no. And the Rambam doesn't think that either. It's that even though, in number 2 in the second line, even though there's a verse to love every Jew, this is a thing that I'm not sure we remember anymore either. When we see Jews in the world, when we encounter Jews in the world, what are we supposed to say? What are we supposed to feel? I'm in Miami, I'm in Haifa, I'm in Arad, I'm in a place I've never seen this person before. I meet a fellow Jew. What am I supposed to be thinking and feeling? Ah, there's my brother, there's my cousin, there's my friend. You have to met the ger as another level to that. For the ger, we're not only required to have the usual love that we have for born Jews, we're supposed to have another level. Why? Because this person chose, the Rambam says, to come and join our Torah. So Hashem adds to that and special mitzvos and special warnings about their ona'ah in there. So there's 2 tracks on which I'm talking tonight that I'm hoping we can make sure to be aware of. One is the track of regular Jews. And unfortunately, I've lived in Israel now for a couple of years. It's even more true in Israel than other places that Jews are, unfortunately, on all sides. We get very quickly very comfortable just speaking not nicely to each other, speaking in a way that hurts and that insults and leaves a bad feeling. And there's an no problem. Right? We're not supposed to be doing that to each other. And then if it's a ger, it's all the more so. So says the Rambam number 3, there's a continuation. The Rambam says a mention I couldn't find it. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm saying I didn't find it. He says that we're supposed to remember that Hashem chose a word that's similar to what we're supposed to think about Hashem himself, as it were. We have to love Hashem. We have to love the ger. The Rambam is trying to say that this medrash is telling us we have to think of the gerim as linked to Hashem in important ways to foster and facilitate our treating them correctly. There's also a prohibition in the Torah. So these are reminders of, people here, you can't eat pork. It's a prohibition in the Torah. Great. It's also a prohibition, lahonot tager, to treat a ger badly, and it's also a prohibition to treat a fellow Jew badly. So, but that was the original Mishnah. The Mishnah derived it. I just didn't read it. The Mishnah derived it as from. I skipped it. There's a pasuk here. It's the lo tonu ishad amito. Right, so that's the pasuk that teaches about regular Jews. So these are lavim in the Torah, same as pork, same as non-kosher meat, same as whatever lavim you like. Right. Says Rabbi number 4. No, I'm sorry. The Rambam adds in number 4. We see fresh lo tomar lo. Notice the Sifra's version the Rambam reads for us in the Bright in the Gemara. It was you don't say to a ben gerim, remember your forefathers' actions, and you don't say to Garrett, him or herself, oh, you ate non-kosher, you ate all that terrible stuff. The Sifra adds, you can't say to him, you used to be an Oved Avodah Zarah, and now you think God's going to take you in. And part of the reason why it's so bad to say that is that it's somewhat believable. You can imagine, theoretically, a God who would say, well, if you've worshipped other powers, what am I going to let you come just because you say sorry to let you come worship me? No, it's not true. It's not at all true. It's something to think about. Shari Tshuva, number 5, Rabbi Yonah makes the same thing. There's lots of places where the Torah warned us about not mistreating the ger. Why, says Rabbi Yonah? It's something to remember, and it's something for Shavuot to remember. Being a ger, I know gerim. They keep contact with their family of origin, but it's difficult. They're living in a whole different world. They've abandoned a world that they're used to and that they know and that they felt comfortable. And they come into this world, as I said at the outset, very often to live a life in which periodically things will come up with nobody meaning to be nasty, with nobody do anything wrong. Things will come up and they just feel completely left out. Forget gerim for a second. I've been at meals where people, let's say, who grew up in the New York area, have a much more extensive social network sometimes than people who grew up in other parts of the Jewish world. And they'll get together. So I've been at meals where they'll just start talking. They're innocently just talking about people they know. I know this one, you know this one, this one. There are other people at the table who are completely lost. because they didn't grow up in that environment. So for a ger, it's all the more so. And so Rabbi Yonah is saying we have to always remember this idea. The convert made the choice to leave behind lots or everything they knew and to join and to come under the God's sheltering wings is the metaphor. As it says in Ruth, you left your father, you left your mother, you left your land. You went to all the places. Not simple. But am I right? I'm an Olech Hadash, and I'm 2 years into my time in Israel. And there's lots of things about the country that I don't really get yet. I'm not really on the in of it yet. And I'm watching from the outside. And it's not always a comfortable feeling. All the more so. But you must and Boaz says to her, you should get a full reward from Hashem for all the things you've done. So Rabbi is reminding us of the attitude and the framing we should always have when we think about a ger. These are people who sacrificed a great deal to come join us. The Minchat Chinuch spots in the topic of Ona'ah this very interesting distinction between born Jews and Gerim and converts. Again, baseline, we're not supposed to do Ona'ah of Devarim. Ona'ah of Devarim, so far that we've seen Ona'ah of Devarim, so far, we'll expand on it, but so far is not either raising their hopes, like asking what the price is, just so they don't, and then they don't get a sale and they're all upset about it. That's Ona'ah Devarim. Ona'ah Devarim is telling somebody they're not worthy of joining some group of us, whether it's a Baal Tshuva, somebody who used to sin, or the descendants of Gerim, or Ger themselves, or convert themselves. We'll expand that list in a few moments. I just want to show you a really interesting bit of Chalkino who says, Al Kopanim Nireh, he says it seems to him that it's only with a Jew. With a Jew, the pasuk is Lo Tonu Ish Ramito. That's the verse. You shouldn't commit ona'ah of each Jew to Amito. Now, Amito means your fellow or your colleague, something like that. The Gemara understands that to mean, tradition understands that to mean, that the Jew in question must be observant. Now, nowadays, it's a whole different thing. Nowadays, when people aren't observant, we generally assume either they grew up not knowing and not being properly educated. That's one way that people aren't observant. Or sadly, there are many people who have left observant, but we tend to today assume that the world is so tempting that they don't become misha'im and they're not considered evildoers because of that. They're considered people who have left the path of observance. That's the way we handle it today. At the time of the Gemara, and for most of halakhic history, they thought that somebody who left, who had had an education and left, lost some of the rights of being a full Jew. I only bring that as a background, not as a suggestion that we should return to it, but it's important background here. Because the issue of not doing ona'ah says the Minchas Chinuch, says the Gemara, to a fellow Jew is only when that Jew is big Torah mitzvah. It has to be a mitcha, it has to be your colleague, your fellow, somebody who's in the same realm as you. Aval gabe ger ala bekol inyan. But Minchas Chinuch says you think with a ger it's not true. I mean, Minchas Chinuch says, imagine a ger, somebody who converts. Now, let's imagine today there are all sorts of problematic things. One place where this comes up a lot, and that's why in Israel they talk about after many geras. There are many people in Israel who are giving more converts. Many of them are complicated questions about whether they really should have been converted or not converted because their observance isn't great, and there's all sorts of issues and disagreements. And there are people on either side, but there are thoughtful people on lots of sides of the issue. So imagine though that somebody converts, and let's imagine they do a fine conversion. At the time of the conversion, they accept mitzvot, and then whatever happens, they leave. They don't keep the mitzvah. And there are many conversions where pretty much everybody knows that's what's going to happen. The Minchas Chinuch is arguing that nonetheless, in that situation, there is no permissibility of ona'ah. With a born Jew, let's imagine there's a born Jew who had a perfect education, a perfect family life, had no reason to leave, and leaves anyway, and there was no cultural issue, is just sadly a rush. Sadly, has left Judaism. We're not required to worry about ona'ah of that person. That's what the Minchas Chinuch was pointing out. With a convert, he's saying we are, even though they're not keeping mitzvah, same thing. His answer is because the Torah doesn't say, with a ger, it doesn't say lo tonush amito. With a ger, with a convert, it says the ger lo tonem. Says you're not allowed to onah to a ger. That's an important distinction that the Minchas Chinuch suggests. Now the Aruch HaShulchan brings up a few issues that like there's one financial, there's an Dvarim. He reminds us from the Gemara. I just didn't bring the Gemara. The Gemara points out this is one of the mitzvot where the Torah says "V'yareta me'elokecha." The Gemara tends to think that when the Torah says "Yirei Elokecha," what it means that a Baal Tshuva or a ger, a convert, or somebody who once not observant, you can bring up things and they know that they know it, and they know they only know it because they were once not observant. Or it doesn't have to be like that. With a born Jew who's never been not observant, you can bring up things that are sensitive to them, and you'll say, well, "I'm not doing or not doing," it just happened to come up. Somebody once committed, God forbid, adultery, and their marriage broke up over adultery. And you have to be with them somewhere, and you throw adultery into the conversation. So that's what the Aruch HaShulchan in number 7 is saying. There's a problem. Hashem knows what you're doing. Hashem knows your motives. Hashem knows what you're thinking, and that's all part of this as well. And Aruch HaShulchan stresses that Onat Dvarim is a terrible thing because with money, if I overcharge somebody, and a year later I realize I overcharged them or I was a bad guy, and I can return it. Now, the truth is they wouldn't have had it for the year and it might ruin their lives. But the words I can never get back, right? That's what the Aruch HaShulchan is stressing for us. And the tradition is that whoever cries out to God because of Onat Dvarim is going to answer. That's the Rabbi Eliezer story that I mentioned right at the outset. Rabbi Eliezer cries out, even though Rabbi Eliezer wasn't right, even though Rabbi Gamliel was correct for what he was doing. Nonetheless, it's Onat Dvarim. So it's very, very important to be sensitive to these things. Right? So the Aruch HaShulchan, when he says that we have the right to do it to a Russia, we could speak harshly to an evildoer, but he gives such an interesting reason. He says maybe that'll lead him to repent. Now, nowadays, that's almost never true. There might have been a time when Rishayim were still so much part of the Jewish community, just said the right thing to them at the right moment, they would repent in that way, but not today. And therefore, it's an important question to think of and to be careful about how we speak to people. And particularly in Israel, I feel like the discourse is extremely coarse, coars, extremely rough between Jews. And the obligations of Ona'ah are reminding that we're not supposed to speak that way to each other. And the Aruch HaShulchan adds an example that we don't have. He says, first of all, you have to be careful with wives. And Gemara thought women would be sensitive to verbal insults maybe more than men. That's something to keep track of and to be aware of. And he also says, and this is an example I had seen anywhere, he says it applies to just about feelings and things like that. He says, if somebody was ugly, physically unattractive, or has some physical disfigurement, can't say it to them. You're not supposed to say it to them. And that feeds in also to embarrass them in public. So it all comes in together. So just to close, the last piece of what I wanted to point out, there's a Tzitz Eliezer who talks about a ger and a convert, and he says, you've got to remember that the impulse, the instinct to convert is thought of as being divine inspiration. And when somebody converts halachically, they're like a new person. And they've been born that day, like Adam HaRishon, like the first human in Bereshit. And he says that's why we think about all this. So he's pointing out, he's stressing what I've been trying to stress. If a convert comes to learn Torah, it's incorrect. It's not just wrong and meaning morally wrong. It's factually incorrect. Say, who do you think you are? You ate worms and you ate scallopini and shrimp and this, and you're gonna learn Torah. It's incorrect. It's not the same person, right? The ger, the convert, is a new person. So as we enter Shavuot, right? As we enter Shavuot, I just hope, and I'm hoping for all of us, that we can remember as we deal with foreign Jews, as we deal with non-foreign Jews, as we deal with Jews who've been observant their whole life, as we deal with Jews who have returned to observance, as we deal with Jews who are sadly not currently observant. I hope for all of us remember the proper and appropriate ways to speak to each other and not violate either one prohibition or two prohibitions or more than that in terms of the prohibitions of ona'ah, of not mistreating fellow Jews. And that's it for me. Thank you very much.